Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Some of you may have joined the webinar we had last year on the similar topic, so some of the material is the same, but we are hitting a few different topics today. So just to remind you that if you do have a question during the webinar, you can type it in the chat and I can see it and I'll try to get to it, and I'll try to leave room at the end for questions, and we can unmute our phones and just ask the questions aloud. So we're going to hit a few different topics today, as I said, under the umbrella of social media. So talking about using social media as a club and to market and promote our programs and services. We'll touch on guidelines for our staff using social media, also how we can better guide the youth in our programs as they use social media and digital tools. And we will also talk a bit about policies. So I am assuming by your presence at this webinar today that I don't have to do any convincing. We know that there's lots of reasons why we as clubs that serve young people and families and communities need to know about social media. It needs to be part of our not only our communication strategy, but also it's a big part of the lives of the kids that we serve, kids and youth, and obviously our staff are using it for their personal reasons, and sometimes it can be related to work. So we absolutely need to get involved with this. Kids are on their smartphones about 2.5 hours per day. I would argue that time is probably even a little bit low. If there's a way that young people are talking about their lives and we can get involved, we want to be listening, of course. You know, it's so hard to get teens to talk to us. So if there's any opportunity that there's a way that's easier for them, we want to take advantage, of course. And I also think going forward, digital literacy, website building, social media platforms, and communication is essential that young people know to help them in their job search in the future. So we at St. Albans, we've been using Facebook and Twitter for some time now. It started for us as a way to reach our community, reach the parents of the kids in the programs, but it certainly developed from there to a way for staff to communicate with each other and with the youth in the programs. So it's been quite wonderful for us, but of course, there was a learning curve there. We've made the decision to just limit it to Facebook and Twitter. I know there's lots of other social media platforms out there that are great, but I'm the person that manages the St. Albans Facebook and Twitter accounts, and like all of you, there's lots of aspects to our job. I don't think any club probably has someone dedicated to being a social media manager and that's their only job. So we've just made the decision that these are the biggest platforms for our audience, so to also incorporate things like Snapchat and Instagram into our messaging would just be too much. So we're just choosing to focus on those two. I would say that if you haven't gotten started yet, I assume most of you have if you're here, to just choose one platform to start and then decide from there where you want to go. And I would say for most of you, probably Facebook and Twitter is like 50-50. It's going to be one of those, and your decision is just between those. So something that a lot of clubs, once they get started, usually they get started first, then they think about policies and guidelines. And I know that different clubs are further along in this process than others. So a danger you can get into if you feel like you want to write a social media policy is that once you start to get very specific, things will change for social media too quickly for you to always keep up in your guidelines. You don't want to be modifying them all the time. So in ours, we just say something like, for example, Facebook or Twitter, but we don't lay it out that that's the only thing we're talking about. We say in our guidelines, we talk about social media and just use that as an umbrella term, so that we don't have to change it every time there's a new platform. Also, we don't actually have social media policies as a separate section of our website, of our policies. We have staff interaction policies that guide how staff should interact with youth or parents or children that are in the program, and social media is a part of that. So we've just simply added on. So the same theory would apply whether a staff is interacting with a youth member or a client of the club, whether they see them in person, on the phone, or by email. This is just another tool, and it's not going to cause anyone to do anything differently than they would with all the other tools. So to be respectful, to have boundaries, and all those things would apply whether we're talking about being on the phone or being on Facebook. So here's just an example here. If some clubs went out right away and said they made a policy or a guideline that says staff can't be friends with members on Facebook. So two major problems with that. One, for us, like I'm sure most of your clubs, our youngest staff are also youth. They're in the same programs in the evenings with the youth, or maybe they're just a year older, so their friends are youth who participate in our programs, but the staff themselves could be 16 or 17 or 18 years old and working in the children's program. So their friends, of course, are going to be friends on Facebook, and we can't really control that or ask to control that. The other thing is, too, that as soon as Facebook introduced circles where you can control who sees your posts, a policy that said staff don't be friends with members on Facebook would be out of date as soon as that happened. So that's why for us it made more sense to just give general guidelines about the types of behavior we expect from our staff and the boundaries we expect them to create between them and clients or members. So we have a set of guiding principles that's included in our guidelines. And also, social media is included in our communication guidelines and our communication policies, but it didn't require a whole nother set of policies. For communication, social media now has become another way for you to get your message across, but it's the same messaging that happens whether you're sending out a press release, you're updating your website, you're putting out a brochure, you're doing an interview on television, and social media is another tool to support that. So while it doesn't need a whole other set of guidelines, it just needs to be included in your communication policies. So staff, whether we're talking about frontline staff or a staff like me who's managing your social media channels, they need training. Unless you've hired someone who comes as an expert in this area, just because most staff are on Facebook or Twitter in their personal life, it doesn't mean that they have expertise in how to use this as an organization or in a professional way. But also, if you're thinking about supporting youth and learning about technology, privacy issues on social media and stuff like that, it's not necessarily true that a person who has tech background or communications background is the best person to work with youth. So you kind of need people to collaborate or a person who's great at both things. So yes, this is just elaborating on what we were saying, that we have incorporated social media into policies that already existed for us. So no matter what, I would say probably my expectation is because you're here on this webinar, you're probably using social media already. But my advice would be to any club who's not using it, at the very minimum, you may make a decision for your club that you don't want to be on social media at all. And while I disagree, that's a valid choice and that might be something your club has decided, but at the very least, you need to be monitoring what's going on in social media. Should an event occur that affects your club or your community, you definitely want to know what people are saying online, because that's happening way faster than anything on television in the news or anything like that. So at the very minimum, you need a plan. Someone needs to be monitoring your organization's name or your community online, but hopefully most people will be doing more than that on social media. So while I did mention that the social media aspect should be added onto your communication plan and support your main messages, the main difference is that in traditional communication, so let's say an advertisement or a magazine article, a newspaper article, a press release, it's more like broadcasting. Your message is going out to the audience, and there's not a lot of feedback back, or if there is, it's not immediate. Whereas with social media, we think of it as a conversation. We try not to limit ourselves by thinking, we want to tell everyone something. I want to tell them that we have this new sports program starting. I want to tell them the pool's closed today. I want to think about social media as I want to find out from my audience what they need, or if they have a problem with something that's happened at the club. I mean, hopefully they would have talked to us in not such a public space, but if they haven't, I want to listen to that. If parents are really struggling finding after-school programs for their preteen in my community, I want to hear about that. So it really goes both ways. And our hope is always that if we share messages, that they'll also talk to us and have some response. Another aspect to think about if you're assigning a staff to using social media for the club, you just have to think about, I mean, I don't have clear-cut advice, but I would say something to think about is a social media manager's job isn't just 9 to 5. They need to be listening outside of club hours, of course, and they'll definitely be using personal devices to do that. They'll have some sort of monitoring program set up, like, for example, I have alerts, so every time St. Albans is tweeted, I get an alert no matter what time it is. And if there was ever a problem, I respond after work hours, or if it's even anything, if it's positive, I want to respond as well because I want to encourage interaction. So for me, this doesn't take up a ton of time outside of work, but it's just something to think about. Sometimes people wonder how much staff should get involved with your club's page on their personal pages, and my feeling is we want to get the word out about St. Albans and Boys and Girls Clubs. So if something's going on here, we share it on Facebook, and then my coworker then re-shares that with her audience, then that's tons more people that are going to see that. If staff on their personal social media are talking about what a wonderful place it is at the Boys and Girls Club and how much they love working there and how hilarious the kids are, that's amazing, and I want that to happen. I would never want to limit people talking positively about the club, of course. And then in terms of speaking negatively about their work or the club, that's the same guidelines we would talk to them about whenever they're talking publicly about the club, no matter where it is, on social media, in person, on the phone. So we would hope that they would not do that, of course. So after we did this presentation last year, there were a few questions about thoughts about using social media in crisis communication. So I thought I'd touch on that. So in terms of crisis communication, of course, just like any other aspect of your plan, this needs to be thought about ahead of time before it happens. If it's a big crisis, you won't have time while it's happening to implement it for the very first time or to start thinking about it. But as I mentioned before, your crisis communication plan needs a social media aspect, even if your club is not already using social media for marketing purposes. So at the very least, you need to know how to monitor what's going on. So if there were a problem in your community that affected your club, you would definitely want to know what's being said online. You would want to figure out quite quickly which hashtag is trending or what people are using to talk about that subject. And certainly if anyone's speaking negatively about your club, you want to know that right away so that you can respond to it, ideally on social media. But if you can't, then at least you know what people are going to say so that you can choose another channel to speak about whatever they're saying if it's negative. You need to figure out who's going to send out notifications if you are going to choose to do that. And with backup people. Depending on what the crisis is, let's say, for example, it's weather, or let's say, for example, it's illness that hits half the staff who can't come in, you need to know who's going to do it if the original person can't. You need to definitely include a plan for the message to go out, not from the club, because whatever the crisis is may involve the club being closed or the person who's tweeting not being able to be at the club, so probably personal devices. And by personal devices, I don't mean your club needs to start paying for people's personal device. I use my personal device for tweeting and everything, and I have it anyways. It doesn't cost anything extra, so, I mean, that's fine with me. And as much as possible, your messaging needs to be clear, concise, and accurate, as quick as possible. Things on social media happen really fast, and they happen much faster than any other form of communication, traditional communication. So if people are talking about it already, hopefully you're going to be part of that conversation. And certainly if people have asked you a question, you need to respond right away. So again, you're supporting the same message. So let's say you're going to send out a press release about the event, your social media messaging is going to say the same kinds of things, but it's in a shorter way and it's faster. So, and also with a press release, you're able to get multiple people to read it over and see if it's okay. And for social media, you're probably not going to be able to do that. So it's always a good idea that in a crisis, the person tweeting has authority to be able to send out the messages without consulting or getting that proofread or whatever. They are within the decision-making group. So to turn it away from things that are serious or emergencies, I always like to highlight some of the great things we could be doing to support kids that come to the club with what they do on social media. So to talk to them about how they can expand how they use it, besides, you know, a lot of them just talk to their friends or follow TV shows or bands they like or something like that. But there's tons of opportunity for activities you could even do in program at the club instead of just guiding them about and telling them about that they could do at home. So social media allows us all, but especially youth, to connect with people they wouldn't normally have the opportunity to speak with. So we know that Chris Hadfield is amazing on social media. He's on, I think, pretty much every platform. And he did, I think, while he was in space, he did a Reddit AMA, Ask Me Anything. So, you know, people got to speak to him directly and ask him questions about being an astronaut. It's pretty cool. On Twitter, something like Twitter, you could talk to them about how we build a positive personal brand instead of only talking to them about the negatives that could happen or about privacy dangers. I mean, while we do need to talk to them about that, I think that it's way more effective to talk about the positives. So this is just an example of a local principal that I met, and he has a Twitter account, and he encourages his students to follow him. And what he does is he sets an example of how you can still be funny and talk about your personal life, but anything you talk about personally is appropriate. You wouldn't mind if a future employer saw that, or your friend saw it, or if your mom saw it. But he also talks about the school and education. So he's doing a really great job of combining his personal and professional life. But part of the reason why he does it is to show his students the right way to do that. So this is my About Me page. So it doesn't necessarily have to be on About Me. There's lots of other platforms for it. But I'm pretty sure that in a couple years, people aren't going to be handing in paper resumes or resumes in Word documents any longer. Our resumes will live online. And so to train young people about how to do that and how to talk about who you are professionally and what jobs you might like or be good at without putting stuff like your address online, I think that will be pretty important and could be a way to incorporate that into some of our youth programs and our youth employment programs. So here we have examples of a couple of the young people in our Raising the Grade program and their blogs. So for them, they don't have to talk about school or anything like that. We just guide them to talk about what they want and what they like. So here's a couple of examples of what they have talked about on their blog. So we're telling them it's a way to express yourselves and to use your voice and to write about something that's not just for a school assignment. So a couple examples here of like just some cool things that have happened with St. Albans in social media. So this is an example of one of our staff members who Graham is our youth services coordinator. He uses Facebook to reach out to youth. So he is friends with youth on Facebook, but he uses a different account than his personal account. Technically, this is not allowed in Facebook's terms of service, so I don't necessarily recommend it, but it's working well for him so far. So he is able to reach a whole bunch of youth very easily and also to find out for them. In this case, they're organizing a basketball team, so who'd like to join, and he got a lot more responses that way than he would have been able to by calling all the youth. It would take so long, or by waiting till they came into the club, which could take a couple weeks. Here's another example of the same person promoting the summer employment program, and you can see there's lots of responses and people who are interested, and they might not have found out about it any other way. We try to make our feed fun, because if your feed is very business-like, then people might stop following you because they might feel like it crowds up their news feed. So, and we like to post fun pictures of staff, because that's who the parents and the kids identify with the most, especially the frontline staff. So as you can see here, it's just a fun post, a picture of Megan, one of our most popular staff, and 33 likes. The more likes and reshares you get, the higher you're going to show on people's feeds. So that's always good, because when we have something important to say, we want it to show at the top of their list. And then this is Graham's same staff from before, and he has even more likes on his picture with 70 likes. And it's just a fun picture, and we got lots of feedback on that. And this is me tweeting from my personal account. I did a workshop with the youth in Raising the Grade, met a couple youth in there, and my Twitter is public, so I'm comfortable sharing anything on there that's appropriate. And so we had talked about, I think it was Justin Bieber or One Direction or something. So I sent them a cool video about that to get, them to feel positively about the workshop. So these are just a couple. I know we're running out of time. I want to leave time for questions if anyone has. So these are just some more places that you can get information about things like safety. And Patrick Mott specifically talks, he's only he's probably 18 now himself, and he has his own digital marketing firm where he advises people on using social media, and specifically social media in youth. But I can send this presentation to everyone on the call, so you have it afterwards. And if you think of any more questions after this, then here's how you can get in touch with me, and I'm happy to help because I love this subject, so you can definitely call me there. And that's it from me. So if anyone has any questions, you can probably unmute now, or you could type it in.
If you muted your phone by pressing *6, you can press *6 again, and that will unmute your phone, and you can just ask the questions that way, or you can type them into the chat box. While we're waiting for some questions, I'll let everybody know about our upcoming webinar. It's a two-part webinar on the new BGCC approach to grants and the 2015 BGCC post-secondary scholarships. It'll be on Wednesday, February 25th at 1 p.m. Part 1 will be an introduction to our new approach to national program grants that we will be piloting, and Part 2 will be about the 2015 BGCC secondary scholarships. They'll be available on the same day as the webinar, so join to learn about eligibility, club staff requirements, and how you can help your youth be successful in receiving a scholarship. And more details about this webinar will be in Scoop. I don't see any questions, and I don't hear any questions, so I just want to thank Laurie so much for doing this webinar for us. And keep the discussion going. You can contact Laurie, or you can contact any member of the National Programs team.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. And as I said, I'm happy to answer any questions by email or phone, Twitter, or anything, Facebook, Instagram.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thanks.